Two twin girls are denied boarding a flight, but the reason isn't what anyone expects. Their father, a high-profile CEO, steps in, and the story quickly turns from an ordinary airport experience into a shocking fight against racism and injustice. What happens next will leave you questioning fairness, courage, and the lengths one parent will go to defend his children. The morning sun filtered gently through the sheer curtains of a modest suburban home, casting soft patterns across the room where twins Amara and Ayana lay sprawled on their beds, their small hands clutching storybooks as if they were shields against the world. Outside, the neighborhood stirred to life with the familiar sounds of early commuters and the rhythmic hum of children on bicycles. Life had a comforting rhythm here, one that felt safe and predictable. A rhythm that, for the twins, had always meant laughter, school projects, and Sunday pancakes with their father, a hard-working man who balanced the weight of a demanding CEO role with the warmth of a presence that made the girls feel like the center of his universe. Amara, the slightly older twin by mere minutes, traced her finger across the illustrated pages of a story about explorers charting unknown lands. Her curiosity had always been insatiable, a trait inherited from her father, who would often answer her endless questions with patience and a twinkle in his eye. Ayana, meanwhile, nestled into the corner of her bed, her curls tumbling over her face as she whispered the story aloud to herself. The twins shared a quiet understanding, a silent bond that had grown from countless nights spent whispering secrets and sharing dreams under the dim glow of a bedside lamp. Their world, though small, was a sanctuary of love, imagination, and the belief that hard work and kindness would always be rewarded. Their father, Malik, had built his life on this very principle. He was a man who commanded respect in boardrooms yet knelt on the floor at home to braid the girls' hair, who navigated high-stakes negotiations with grace and precision while never missing a chance to attend school plays or science fairs. The girls adored him, not just for his authority, but for the unwavering reassurance that they were safe, valued, and capable of achieving anything. Malik's presence had always been a buffer against the harsher edges of life, a shield against the subtle slights and dismissive glances that sometimes followed them in the world outside their home. On this particular morning, the twins were unusually animated, buzzing with excitement over an upcoming trip. Their father had promised them a rare treat, a short family vacation to a nearby city where they could explore museums, ride Ferris wheels, and indulge in the little luxuries that made ordinary days extraordinary. Malik had meticulously planned the trip, ensuring that every detail was perfect, from the hotel reservations to the carefully packed bags that were neatly lined up by the door. The air in their home was thick with anticipation, a tangible pulse of happiness that made even the mundane act of tying shoelaces feel celebratory. As the girls chattered about which outfits to wear and which exhibits they were most excited to see, there was an innocence in their conversations that felt fragile against the backdrop of a world that often failed to recognize their worth. Their excitement was undimmed by the small, almost imperceptible reminders that they did not always fit the mold society expected. Teachers' offhand comments about being careful in certain neighborhoods, neighbors' raised eyebrows at their hairstyles, and strangers' curious stares during grocery trips were dismissed with a shrug at home, a lesson Malik had instilled early. The world might judge unfairly, but they could never let that define them. Malik, bustling around the kitchen with his usual efficiency, kept one eye on the clock and another on the twins. "Remember, girls," he said with a grin that barely masked the weight of his responsibilities, "adventure is about curiosity and courage. Keep your eyes open, ask questions, and never let anyone dim your excitement." His voice carried both warmth and authority, a combination that had always soothed the girls' uncertainties. The kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and toasted bread, a comfort that seemed almost sacred, an anchor to a life where love and respect were constants. Packing the final items, Malik carefully slipped their passports and tickets into a leather folder. He paused, looking at the twins, their tiny faces alight with enthusiasm, and felt a flicker of unease he could not quite name. It was not a fear of the journey itself, but a vague sense that the world outside their insulated life could sometimes be harsher than expected. He brushed it aside with a deep breath, reminding himself that the girls were strong, that they were prepared, and that he would always be there to protect them. Yet, even in this moment of familial bliss, there was an undercurrent, small, nearly invisible, that hinted at the tension to come. The drive to the airport was filled with laughter and playful banter. Amara and Ayana pressed their faces to the window, marveling at the changing scenery, their voices rising and falling like the rhythm of their excitement. Malik kept one hand on the wheel, eyes scanning the road, mind half-focused on traffic, half conscious of the subtle dynamics of the world they were about to enter. Airports, he knew, were gateways to adventure and opportunity, but they were also microcosms of society, where first impressions and assumptions could quickly turn into obstacles. Despite this, the girls were oblivious to the nuances of prejudice, their hearts buoyed by trust in their father and the expectation that the world would treat them as they had always been treated at home, with fairness, curiosity, and decency. They clutched their boarding passes with pride, imagining the endless possibilities that awaited them. Malik smiled, silently promising to shield them from any slights, to intervene when necessary, to ensure that their sense of wonder remained intact. As they approached the check-in counter, the subtle signs began. Polite smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes, cursory glances at their documents, whispers exchanged just out of hearing range. The twins, holding tightly to each other's hands, remained blissfully unaware, their excitement untouched by the first flickers of discomfort. Malik, however, felt a tightening in his chest, a premonition that the smooth rhythm of their day might soon encounter an unexpected, unwelcome disruption. He reassured himself that perhaps it was just fatigue, just the peculiarities of airport staff, but deep down, he recognized the faint edge of something more insidious. Yet in the midst of these unspoken tensions, the day felt perfect. The sun shone brightly above, and the laughter of the twins echoed in the sterile hallways of the terminal, an insistence that joy and innocence could withstand the subtle biases of the world. Malik's hand brushed a strand of hair from Ayana's face, and he whispered a private joke that made them both giggle, unaware that the boundaries of their secure, loving bubble were about to be tested in ways they could never have imagined. Even as the announcement of their flight echoed through the terminal, carrying passengers toward their gates, the twins' minds were full of wonder, not wariness. They imagined the Ferris wheel, the museum exhibits, the new foods they might try. Malik kept glancing at the clock, calculating every step with precision, while a knot of unease lingered beneath his practiced composure. It was a tension without form, an instinctive awareness that life's simplicity often gave way to complexity in the blink of an eye, a complexity that would soon manifest in a way neither he nor the twins could ignore. The setup of their day was ordinary, even idyllic, yet under the surface, the edges of the world hinted at prejudice and societal rejection that would soon challenge the twins' innocence, their father's protective instincts, and the very core of their families' belief in fairness and justice. This ordinary morning, filled with laughter, anticipation, and the warmth of familial love, set the stage for an extraordinary confrontation with the realities of a world that often judged too quickly, that sometimes punished those who merely dared to exist authentically. Inside the airport cafe, Malik allowed the twins a small treat, a chocolate croissant for Amara and a strawberry muffin for Ayana. They perched on high stools, their legs swinging freely, their chatter about the upcoming adventure filling the air with warmth. Around them, travelers moved in a blur, many absorbed in their own devices, others juggling luggage and hurried conversations. The twins noticed little of this. Their world was contained within their shared excitement and the protective orbit of their father. Yet even amidst the hum of normalcy, Malik's eyes caught moments that made him tighten his jaw, a group of business travelers who barely masked glances, a pair of airline staff who whispered behind the counter while glancing in their direction, a hint of hesitation when the girls smiled brightly. He told himself it was nothing, an overactive imagination fueled by news stories of incidents in airports, of families being mistreated. Still, a protective instinct, older than reason, whispered that the day's simplicity might not last. Amara, ever the observant twin, noticed these subtle shifts, even if she could not yet understand their meaning. "Daddy, why is that lady looking at us like that?" she asked, her small brow furrowing as she followed the gaze of a flight attendant. Malik crouched slightly, bringing himself to their eye level. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "people notice differences and don't understand them right away. But that's okay. We keep smiling, we keep kind, and we don't let it bother us. Okay?" The girls nodded, reassured by his calm authority, their trust in him absolute. The security checkpoint was next, and the twins' hands tightened around Malik's. They navigated the scanners and bag checks with polite compliance, chatting nervously about which window seat they preferred. Security personnel moved around them, and for the first time, Malik noticed an unusual thoroughness in how their bags were examined, a lingering pause over their personal items that seemed disproportionate to the routine checks being applied to others. Again, he dismissed it, telling himself not to overthink, that rules and protocols sometimes varied. As they gathered their belongings, Amara whispered to Ayana, "Do you think they think we don't belong here?" Ayana blinked, confused by the idea. "What do you mean?" "Of course we belong." Amara shrugged, unsure herself, but the question hung in the air, unspoken and heavy, a foreshadowing of the conflict to come. Malik heard it and squeezed Amara's shoulder, silently vowing that no one's ignorance would diminish his daughter's sense of belonging, even as he sensed the first ripples of the injustice about to unfold. Their gate was a small enclave, yet bustling with travelers, each absorbed in their own worlds. Malik helped the twins settle into chairs by the window, the terminal light casting golden streaks across their faces. They played a quiet game, identifying airplanes taxiing along the runway and imagining where each might be headed. It was innocent, joyous, a small bubble of childhood in a space dominated by hurried adults and impersonal transactions. Malik took a moment to reflect, sipping his coffee, watching his daughter's smiles. He remembered their first day of school, the nights spent struggling to braid their curls just right, the times they came home with scraped knees or bruised egos from playground disagreements. Every victory, every small act of courage, had been nurtured in a home where love was abundant and unconditional. The twins had learned early that their world at home was a sanctuary, a place where they were safe from judgment, from cruelty, from the unfairness that sometimes greeted the outside world. Yet even as he cherished these moments, Malik's mind began to wander, tracing the paths of countless news stories, articles, and anecdotes he had encountered over the years. Stories of families denied entry, of children questioned because of skin color, of parents forced to advocate fiercely for basic decency. He pushed the thoughts aside, telling himself not today, not with his girls. Today was meant for wonder, for excitement, for laughter untainted by prejudice. Amara leaned forward, eyes wide as a plane took off, leaving a contrail across the cloudless sky. "Daddy, I want to fly like that one day," she exclaimed. Malik chuckled, the sound light yet threaded with an awareness that dreams often collided with reality in unexpected ways. "You will, my little explorer," he said, brushing a curl from her face. "And when you do, you'll soar higher than anyone can imagine. Always remember that." The twins' excitement was palpable, and the energy seemed to pull Malik into a rare sense of ease. The morning had gone without incident, the rhythm of their routine uninterrupted, and yet the subtle currents of prejudice lingered, invisible but present. Staff moved around them, their polite nods slightly strained, their smiles polite but distant. The twins noticed little, but Malik felt the weight, an unspoken challenge to the fairness and equality he had worked so hard to instill in them. As boarding announcements echoed through the terminal, the girls gathered their things, their movements, synchronized in the unspoken choreography of twinship. They followed Malik, their hands in his, their trust in him absolute. The world beyond the terminal was vast, full of opportunity and experience, yet also full of uncertainty and judgment. Malik knew that the next steps might test everything he had taught them, everything the twins had come to believe about fairness, courage, and love. Still, in this moment, the day remained perfect. The sunlight glinted off the polished floors. The distant roar of engines promised adventure, and the twins' laughter created a protective bubble around them. Malik whispered a silent promise. No matter what happened, he would be there, their shield, their advocate, their unwavering support. The morning was ordinary, but it carried within it the tension of an approaching storm, a test of resilience that none of them could yet foresee. Even as they approached the gate, the first subtle indications of prejudice began to ripple. Hesitant glances, the slight delay in staff movement, the whispers that stopped when they drew near. To anyone else, these were trivial, almost imperceptible, but Malik's instincts recognized them. The world was about to challenge the sanctuary of their childhood, to confront the belief that kindness and fairness always ensured safety. The twins remained blissfully unaware, their trust in their father and the goodness of the world absolute, even as the edges of that world hinted at the trials to come. The twins' journey was about to shift from a day of innocent adventure to an encounter that would test their understanding of justice, belonging, and courage. Their ordinary morning, filled with laughter, care, and meticulous preparation, had set the stage for an extraordinary confrontation. Every smile, every gesture of love, every reassurance whispered by Malik was a buffer against a prejudice that awaited them just beyond the gate. A prejudice that would soon demand action, resilience, and the courage to confront a world that did not always recognize innocence or worth. The moment they approached the boarding gate, a subtle shift occurred in the air, a tension almost palpable to Malik, though invisible to the twins. A flight attendant, clipboard in hand, greeted them with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Her gaze lingered too long on the girls' passports, then flicked to Malik as if searching for something unspoken. The twins, oblivious to the undercurrent, chattered excitedly about the plane and the view from their seats. Malik forced a smile, clutching their hands tightly, but inside, a knot of unease began to tighten. As he handed over the boarding passes, the attendant's smile faltered. "I'm going to need to verify a few details before you board," she said, her voice polite but firm. Malik's brow furrowed. "Is there a problem?" he asked, already sensing the subtle hint of bias he had been trying to dismiss. She shook her head, but her eyes were not reassuring. "Just a routine verification," she insisted, though her body language betrayed hesitation. The twins glanced up at their father, confusion flickering across their faces. "Daddy, is something wrong?" Ayana whispered, her small hand tightening around his. Malik crouched to meet their gaze, forcing calm into his voice. "Nothing to worry about, girls. Just a small check. We'll be on the plane soon." But even as he spoke, the unease spread. The airline staff moved slowly, scrutinizing the documents and asking questions in a way that felt designed to stall rather than clarify. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. Other passengers boarded smoothly, their passes scanned with a mechanical efficiency. Smiles exchanged, doors opened. Meanwhile, Malik found himself repeatedly answering questions that had already been answered, requests for identification that seemed unnecessary, explanations of itinerary that were already perfectly documented. Each interaction carried a subtle undertone. Suspicion where there should have been routine. The twins, sensing the shift but unable to understand it fully, huddled closer. "Why are they doing this, Daddy?" Amara asked softly, her eyes wide. Malik swallowed hard, fighting frustration and a rising anger he knew he had to suppress. "Some things aren't fair," he said, forcing a reassuring smile. "But we keep calm. We stay together. And we do the right thing." It wasn't just the delay. It was the way other passengers began to notice. The whispers that floated just out of hearing range, the glances that lingered longer than polite curiosity demanded. A man behind them shifted uncomfortably, muttering to his companion about slow lines and airline inefficiency, never considering that the delay was not accidental. Malik felt the sting of humiliation even as he tried to shield his daughters from it, the helplessness of realizing that no amount of preparation could insulate them from prejudice. The attendant finally looked at him directly. "Sir, we may need to hold your daughters for further verification," she said, her tone careful, almost rehearsed. Malik's chest tightened. "What? Why? They have their boarding passes, IDs. Everything is in order," he said, keeping his voice measured, even as anger threatened to rise. "I don't understand. This isn't standard procedure." The attendant avoided eye contact, gesturing toward the waiting area. "It's policy," she said. "We just need to make sure everything matches before boarding." Malik's heart raced. Policy, he knew, could be wielded as a shield or a weapon. Too often it became the latter when wielded against those who did not fit a narrow expectation. He looked down at Amara and Ayana, whose innocent faces reflected trust and confusion. The twins had been excited, imagining the Ferris wheel, the museum, the freedom of travel. And now, that anticipation was being chipped away by a slow, insidious judgment they could neither see nor defend against. As they were escorted to a small waiting area, Malik's mind raced. He could feel the stares of other passengers, some sympathetic, some openly skeptical, others impatient. The twins clung to him, their tiny hands gripping his jacket as if it were the only anchor in a storm. Malik realized he needed a strategy, but the rules seemed stacked, the staff indifferent to fairness, and the clock ticking relentlessly toward departure time. A manager appeared, tall and precise, clipboard in hand, scanning the documents and the faces before him. "We're just doing a routine check," he said, voice neutral but carrying an edge. Malik's jaw tightened. "This is not routine. I've done everything required. My daughters are boarding passengers. There's no reason for this treatment." The manager nodded, but the nod lacked affirmation. It was procedural, not compassionate. Malik could feel the twin forces of bureaucracy and bias pressing against him, their daughter's patience wearing thin, their excitement fading with each passing minute. Amara tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, I don't want to wait anymore." Malik knelt, keeping his voice calm. "I know, sweetie, I promise we'll figure this out. Just a little longer." But even as he spoke, the air of tension thickened. Other passengers had begun to murmur among themselves, some shooting looks of curiosity, others judgment. What should have been a simple boarding process had become a public spectacle, a subtle, humiliating display of suspicion directed at two young girls and their father. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. Malik's patience frayed, though he maintained composure for the twins' sake. The manager asked more questions, each one less logical than the last. The twins grew restless, whispering to each other, their excitement replaced by anxiety they did not know how to articulate. Malik felt the helplessness of watching his children subjected to an injustice that had no clear recourse, the frustration of knowing that truth and fairness meant little against the weight of suspicion. Finally, Malik was handed a phone. The manager said curtly, "You may need to call the corporate office for verification." Malik's pulse spiked. He could feel the twins' tiny hands in his, sensing the moment's gravity even if they didn't fully understand it. The thought of having to escalate, of bringing the weight of corporate authority into a situation that should have been resolved with basic decency, was infuriating, but he knew he had no choice. As he dialed the number, the twins leaned close, their faces anxious. "Daddy, will it be okay?" Ayana asked. Malik's voice was steady, though his heart pounded. "It will be. We just have to speak up and make sure they do the right thing." On the other end of the line, a voice answered with practiced efficiency. Malik explained the situation, his tone firm but controlled, demanding immediate attention to the injustice his daughters were experiencing. The twins watched silently, holding their breath as if sensing the tension in their father's voice. Malik's words carried both authority and desperation. Authority because he was their father and a man used to being heard. Desperation because no one should have to justify their children's right to board a flight. Around them, the airport hummed with indifference, other passengers' eyes flicking toward the scene, some curious, some impatient, some incredulous. Minutes later, the manager returned, a subtle shift in demeanor suggesting the call had an impact. "We've verified everything," he said, voice clipped. "You may board." Malik's heart rate eased slightly, though the sting of humiliation remained. The twins' faces lit up with relief and excitement. Yet the memory of the delay, the stares, and the questioning lingered. Malik took their hands firmly, walking them toward the plane, aware that their brief sanctuary of innocence had been pierced by prejudice and systemic bias. Even as they stepped onto the jet bridge, Malik knew this was not the end. The encounter had exposed the twins to the reality that the world often judged unfairly, that bias could lurk beneath polite words and policies, that courage and vigilance were necessary at every turn. The rising tension of the morning had reached a critical peak, one that would shape the twins' understanding of justice, fairness, and resilience in ways they would only fully comprehend later. And just as they reached the threshold of the plane, a final announcement crackled over the intercom. A delay due to technical issues, unrelated to them, but timed with such precision that it felt like the universe itself was conspiring to prolong their ordeal. Malik's jaw tightened once more. The twins clung to him, excitement now mingled with unease, unaware that the test of their resilience was far from over. The stage was set for confrontation, for the ultimate revelation of the strength that lay within a father and his daughters, and for a moment that would define courage in the face of prejudice. The delay announcement barely had time to register before Malik noticed a subtle shift in the attendant's demeanor, something in the way she avoided his eyes, a tightening in her jaw, a pause that lingered too long. The twins, holding his hands, noticed the hesitation and asked in unison, "Daddy, are we going to get on the plane?" Malik's reassurance felt hollow even to himself. He forced a smile, masking the rising tide of frustration. "Yes, girls, just a little longer. We're almost there." As they waited, another attendant appeared, clipboard in hand, walking past the passengers boarding smoothly. She stopped, eyeing Malik and the twins with a careful neutrality that felt anything but neutral. "Sir, we need to double-check some information," she said. Malik's jaw tightened. "Again? Everything has been verified. We're ready to board," he replied, his tone calm but firm, the frustration barely contained. The twins whispered questions to each other, their earlier excitement replaced with confusion and anxiety. Passengers nearby began to notice, some shooting subtle glances, others muttering. A businessman tapped his watch impatiently, muttering something about delays and inefficiency. A mother nearby pulled her child closer, whispering to her partner, the words faint but laced with judgment. Malik felt the weight of it all, the scrutiny, the whispers, the unspoken suspicion aimed at his daughters simply because of who they were. The twins clung tighter to him, and he could feel the frustration building like a storm ready to break. The manager returned, more insistent this time. "Sir, until our verification is complete, your daughters cannot board." Malik's blood ran cold. "You're holding 2 children? On what grounds?" "Everything is in order," he demanded, voice rising. The manager shook his head. "It's policy," he said, his tone polite but absolute. Malik could feel the helplessness clawing at him, the absurdity of being challenged, for doing nothing wrong. The twins looked at him with wide eyes, sensing his anger and confusion, their trust in the fairness of the world cracking for the first time. Amara's lip trembled, and Ayana's grip on his hand tightened. Malik took a deep breath, kneeling to their level. "Girls, I promise, we will get through this. But sometimes the world is unfair, and when it is, we have to stand up and make sure justice is done," he said, choosing words carefully, aware that their innocence was fragile. The twins nodded, drawing courage from him, though the fear was unmistakable. Malik's mind raced. He knew that he had to escalate, but the implications of challenging an airline publicly were daunting. Passengers were watching, staff were firm, and the twins' emotional state teetered on the edge of distress. He dialed the CEO's office, the highest level he could reach, to demand intervention. His heart pounded with a mix of anger and desperation as he explained the absurdity of the situation. The twins whispered anxiously beside him, holding on to hope that justice might arrive through their father's authority. Minutes felt like hours. The twins fidgeted, whispering to each other. Malik's patience was fraying, but he maintained a calm exterior, masking the storm of indignation inside. Around them, whispers grew louder, subtle stares more pointed, a low hum of judgment spreading through the terminal. What should have been a moment of ordinary boarding had morphed into a public spectacle of scrutiny and humiliation, a display of systemic bias in its most insidious form. Finally, the manager returned, slightly flustered. "We've verified. Everything. You may board." Malik exhaled, relief mixing with residual anger. He looked at the twins, whose faces lit up with excitement once more, though a shadow of the morning's ordeal lingered. They clutched his hands as they walked toward the jet bridge, each step a reminder that the world was not always fair and that resilience was sometimes forged in moments of injustice. Yet as they approached the plane, a new tension emerged. The gate attendant, hesitant, stopped them once more. "Sir, we need to escort your daughters separately for final confirmation." Malik's patience snapped, a surge of controlled fury rising within him. "No, they are boarding passengers. They belong on this flight. I will not separate them." His voice carried authority, desperation, and unyielding determination. Around them, passengers paused, some sympathetic, others curious, many judgmental. The twins clung to him, fear and uncertainty mixing with residual excitement. Amara whispered, "Daddy, why are they doing this to us?" Malik's jaw tightened. "Because sometimes people see differences and misunderstand them. But remember, we do not let that stop us. We stand firm, together." His grip on their hands was unyielding, a silent promise that he would not let bias dictate their journey. The standoff continued, tension coiling like a spring. Malik realized that confrontation was inevitable. Every second stretched, amplifying. The twins' anxiety, the whispers of passengers, and the scrutiny of staff. He knew that a decisive move was needed, something that could not be ignored. a call to authority that carried undeniable weight. The twins sensed it too, their small hands trembling slightly, hearts racing in sync with their father's determination. Malik pulled out his phone once more, calling the corporate office directly. The conversation was terse, professional, yet charged with urgency. He explained every detail, emphasizing the unjust treatment of his daughters, the procedural inconsistencies, and the public scrutiny they had endured. His voice was calm, firm, resolute, an unmistakable signal that this was no ordinary complaint. While he spoke, the twins watched, holding their breath. Around them, passengers shifted, some with curiosity, some with empathy, others whispering about what must be happening to warrant such a call. Malik's words carried power, his authority as both a parent and CEO lending gravity to the situation. The manager listened, noting every detail, his previous confidence now tempered by the awareness that this was escalating beyond routine procedure. Minutes later, a subtle change occurred. The manager nodded, slightly embarrassed, and motioned for them to board. Malik exhaled, relief mixed with lingering indignation. The twins, sensing victory, clutched his hands, their smiles returning but tempered by the ordeal they had endured. Yet even as they stepped onto the plane, Malik knew the experience had left a mark. A silent understanding that the world could judge harshly, that bias existed in subtle yet pervasive forms, and that courage was sometimes required simply to ensure basic fairness. But just as the twins settled into their seats, another obstacle appeared, a pilot's announcement citing a security protocol requiring a brief delay before takeoff. Malik's eyes narrowed. The twins looked to him, their excitement wavering. Was this truly procedural, or another layer of scrutiny? He felt the tension coil again, a reminder that the morning's ordeal had not yet fully ended. The rising action had reached its peak, poised to transition into the climax where confrontation, revelation, and ultimate resilience would collide. The tension in the cabin was palpable before the plane even taxied. Malik's palms were clenched tightly around the armrests of his daughter's seats, his jaw set, his mind racing. The twins sat beside him, small bodies rigid, their eyes wide as they absorbed the magnitude of what was unfolding. A sudden voice over the intercom snapped everyone's attention toward the front of the plane. "Sir, I'm afraid we cannot allow your daughters to board this flight." The gate manager's words had been repeated moments ago, but now, even at their seats, the announcement felt amplified, as if the words were designed to echo in the hearts of every passenger. The twins' faces went pale. Amara's small voice quivered. "Daddy, why?" Malik's own chest tightened. Every ounce of calm he had cultivated unraveled in that instant. He stood, turning to face the attendant who had spoken over the intercom. "You cannot do this. They are passengers. They have tickets. They have done nothing wrong." His voice was measured, though every word vibrated with contained fury. Around him, the cabin fell into a hushed murmur. Eyes darted toward them, some sympathetic, others skeptical. The twins clutched each other's hands, leaning into him, their trust absolute even as the injustice unfolded. The manager's eyes were cool, almost rehearsed. "Sir, our decision is final. We cannot allow them to fly. Security protocol and policy must be followed." Malik's chest tightened further. Security protocol? Policy? Two children, excited and innocent, were being barred from a flight because of the unspoken assumptions of a system meant to serve everyone equally. Yet here, equality had been replaced by prejudice. Amara's small voice broke through the tension, high and urgent. "Daddy, please." Malik looked down at her, and in that gaze, he saw a mixture of fear, confusion, and the raw sense of injustice that no child should ever feel. It was a pivot point. He could remain silent and let the bureaucracy win, or he could fight, knowing that courage, however exhausting, was the only way forward. Malik's hands tightened into fists. He had already tried diplomacy, patience, and calm reasoning. Nothing had worked. The public eyes on him, the whispers, the judging stares, no longer mattered. This was about his daughters, their dignity, and the principle that injustice must never be ignored. "I will not let you treat my children this way," he said, his voice firm, echoing in the cabin. "You have no right to humiliate them. I demand they be allowed on this flight immediately." There was silence, then a low murmur of passengers reacting. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, others leaned forward, sensing the tension escalating into something that could no longer be contained. The attendant hesitated, glancing at the manager who now seemed uncertain for the first time. Malik's voice rose slightly, not in anger, but in unwavering authority. "I am the parent of these children, a responsible adult, and a corporate officer whose authority you cannot dismiss. This stops now." A young passenger seated nearby whispered to her mother, incredulous. "Can they really do this? 2 little girls?" Another muttered under his breath, shaking his head. Malik ignored the murmurs. His focus was on the twins, who now clung to him with desperate urgency. Ayana's small voice trembled. "Daddy, please, don't. Let them take us." Malik's chest constricted. The raw injustice of the moment hit him fully. The vulnerability of children, the cruelty of systemic bias, the helplessness that so often accompanies prejudice. He knew he had to act. Calm authority had failed. Polite requests had failed. Escalation through corporate verification had failed. The next step required courage and visibility. Malik reached for his phone, dialing the CEO of the airline directly. The twins watched, fear mingling with hope. "We are being treated unjustly. I need immediate action," he said, each word carrying the weight of personal and moral authority. "2 children are being denied boarding because of who they are, and this ends now." The cabin waited. Every second stretched unbearably. The twins' small bodies trembled against him, silent witnesses to the confrontation. Other passengers leaned forward, sensing the unfolding injustice. Some filmed discreetly, the first sparks of public accountability flickering in real time. Malik's eyes burned with determination. He could feel the weight of centuries of discrimination, the invisible barriers that children of color often faced in every corner of life, and he refused to let history repeat itself here, in front of everyone. Minutes later, the manager returned, pale and hesitant. "Sir, we've reviewed the matter and you may proceed," he said, voice subdued, almost reluctant. Malik exhaled, a controlled release of tension. He looked at the twins. Relief flooded their faces, but the memory of the ordeal remained etched into their young minds. They clutched each other, still trembling slightly, but now with a spark of triumph. They had endured. They had been defended, and they had survived, an injustice that could have broken them. As they moved toward the plane, Malik's relief was tempered by lingering anger and disbelief. How had something so simple, boarding a plane, become a trial of endurance and courage? How many others, without his resources, without his authority, would have been forced to endure this humiliation in silence? He tightened his grip on the twins' hands, a silent promise that they would always have a shield against injustice, no matter how insurmountable it seemed. Then, just as the plane doors closed behind them, a final, sharp voice rang out. "Sir, we've received another report. There's a complaint about your conduct during boarding. Security will need to speak with you upon landing." Malik froze. The twins' wide eyes looked up at him, and he realized that even victory came with its own battles. The ordeal had not truly ended. The system had been challenged, yes, but prejudice and bureaucracy had a way of lingering, of reasserting themselves even after a small triumph. He sank into his seat, exhausted but unbroken. The twins beside him. Amara rested her head against his shoulder, Ayana's hand gripping his arm, their eyes wide but beginning to regain the innocence of trust. Malik's mind raced with the implications. The fight had been won in this moment, but the war against subtle discrimination, against systemic injustice, was far from over. He looked out the window as the plane ascended, the world shrinking below, and whispered a vow to himself and to the twins. No one will ever make you feel less than you are. Not now, not ever. The cabin settled, yet the echoes of confrontation remained, a reminder that courage could not be contained and that the fight for fairness often demanded exposure, advocacy, and unwavering resolve. The rising tension of the morning had culminated in a defining moment, one where fear, injustice, and determination collided, and where Malik's protective love became a force capable of defying systemic bias. As the plane climbed into the clouds, Malik held the twins close, their hearts still racing. Outside, the world seemed vast, indifferent, and complex. Yet inside that small cabin, a battle had been fought and won. But even in victory, a question lingered. How many others, without a father to fight for them, would face the same prejudice silently? The stage was set for the resolution. Consequences would follow, lessons would be learned, and the impact of courage and resilience would resonate far beyond the confines of that airplane. And as Malik tightened his grip, whispering assurances, to the twins, one thought burned brighter than any fear. The fight for justice was far from over, but the spark of resistance had been lit, unyielding and unstoppable. The plane finally touched down, the landing smooth yet underscored by the morning's tension. Malik led his daughters off the aircraft, their small hands clutching his tightly, their expressions a mixture of relief and lingering disbelief. The ordeal of the day had left marks, visible and invisible, on all three of them, but it had also forged a shared strength. Even in exhaustion, a quiet triumph lingered in their eyes. They had endured an injustice that could have broken their spirit, yet they remained intact, bonded closer than ever. At the airport, corporate staff had been alerted, and the airline's higher-ups were present. Apologies were extended, but they were more than perfunctory words. There was acknowledgement, a recognition that the system had failed these children. Malik accepted the gestures with restrained grace, knowing that while this resolution could not erase the humiliation his daughters had endured, it at least restored their dignity and underscored the power of speaking out. Outside, the twins took their first deep breaths of freedom after hours of tension. They marveled at the sunlight, the bustling crowds, the simple rhythm of ordinary life. Malik watched them carefully, noting the resilience in their posture, the spark of courage that had always existed, but had now been tested and proven. For them, a seemingly routine trip had become a rite of passage, a moment where injustice collided with advocacy, and where personal power had made a real difference. In the weeks that followed, the incident rippled beyond their family. The airline implemented additional staff training on equity and sensitivity, recognizing that systemic bias had been a silent culprit. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation shared their reactions online, sparking discussions about prejudice, accountability, and the responsibilities of institutions toward families and children. Malik's decision to confront injustice head-on became a model of measured, effective advocacy, demonstrating that courage in the face of bias could create tangible change. For the twins, the experience became a profound lesson about resilience and self-worth. They understood that the world would not always be fair, that assumptions based on appearance could obscure recognition of character and capability. Yet they also learned that courage, love, and advocacy could confront even the most entrenched injustices. In their hearts, a seed of determination had been planted. They would carry forward the knowledge that they could face adversity with integrity and strength, that dignity could not be taken without consent. Malik reflected on the ordeal with a mixture of sorrow and pride. Sorrow, because the twins had been forced to confront discrimination at such a young age. Pride, because they had navigated it with bravery, guided by the principles he had instilled. He knew that racism was not merely an individual problem. It was a societal toxin that destroyed families, undermined trust, and fractured communities. But he also knew that one act of courage, one refusal to accept injustice silently, could ripple outward, inspiring change and restoring faith in the power of unity. Back at home, the twins resumed their routines, but life had been subtly altered. Conversations about fairness, resilience, and advocacy became natural, integrated into bedtime stories and everyday discussions. They asked questions, reflected on the incident, and began to understand the moral complexities of the world around them. Malik encouraged them to channel any frustration or anger into action through education, compassion, and awareness, reinforcing the lesson that strength was measured not only in confrontation, but also in the ability to lead and influence positively. In Tesla-Bates, the community, the story spread quietly but meaningfully. Friends, neighbors, and extended family engaged in discussions about bias and discrimination, prompted by the twins' experience and Malik's visible courage. Children learned that it was possible to confront unfairness with dignity, that advocacy could be gentle yet firm, and that the bonds of family provided a shield and a platform from which to resist injustice. The incident became a case study in courage, empathy, and resilience, demonstrating the consequences of prejudice and the transformative potential of united action. Months later, the twins boarded another plane, this time without incident. They giggled as they pressed their faces to the window, pointing at clouds and imagining adventures ahead. Malik watched them, heart swelling, aware that the memory of their previous struggle remained a quiet compass, guiding their understanding of fairness, justice, and courage. The lesson was indelible. Injustice could test them, but integrity and advocacy would always provide a path forward. The moral clarity of the experience crystallized for Malik in a moment of quiet reflection. Racism and prejudice, he realized, were corrosive forces capable of undermining families, weakening communities, and eroding trust. Yet courage, unity, and advocacy were antidotes, capable of healing, restoring dignity, and inspiring broader change. In the eyes of his daughters, he saw proof that resilience could emerge even from pain, that integrity could shine amid adversity, and that love and courage were inseparable allies in the fight against injustice. As they looked out at the horizon, together, Malik whispered, not just to the twins, but as a statement of principle. Prejudice may try to divide us, but courage will always bring us together. No act of hate can outweigh the power of love, unity, and justice. In that quiet, yet powerful moment, the story found its resolution. The family's ordeal had been transformed from a day of fear, humiliation, and injustice into a testament of resilience, advocacy, and moral strength. The twins had survived, they had learned, and the world had, however slightly, been reminded that courage can defeat hate, that unity can heal, and that even in the face of prejudice, dignity and love endure.